Computer science. We're going to talk about another algorithm using for loops. This one is removing elements from a list. And this is a very common problem that you'll get on the AP exam. And it has just a little bit of a trick to it. And that's what they're looking for. Do you know the trick? So we're going to learn it. We're going to learn that trick. So let's look at this implementation. We have a method called remove evens. We want to remove all the even numbers from, from the list nums. So we have an array list of integer objects called nums, and I'm going to loop through it. So my standard for loop, for int I equals 0, while I is less than nums.size, I++. So loop through every element of this list, get the value at index I, store it in a variable. That's the first thing we do in any for loop. And then check, is that number even? So you check for evenness by taking the remainder of 2, comparing it to 0. If the remainder of 2 is 0, then it is even. That's kind of the definition of being even, right? If that's true, then we're going to use the remove method on our list and remove the element at index I from nums because it's even. And we want to remove all of the even values. So remember, again, one of the reasons we're using the for loop here is because one of the can'ts for each loops is that you cannot add or remove elements from a list in a for each loop. So you're just not allowed to remove, to call that remove method within a for each loop. So we have to use a for loop for this. So I want you to trace this, just like we've practiced before, tracing loops and tracing code. Use this example list. So this list with the values 5, 12, 7, 8, 8, 9. And you're going to trace this code and have it and find out what's the list look like after this code is run, where we are removing all evens. And remember, don't trace this intuitively and just do what you think it's supposed to do. Actually look at each line of code, see what it does, and how does that affect the state of the program? How does that affect I, num, and this list nums? What's changing? Do what the code tells you to do, not what you think it's supposed to do. And that will make sure you get the right answer and not just an answer. So pause the video, trace this on a piece of paper, and then I'm going to trace it with you, and we can see if you did it right or if I did it right. So go ahead and pause. All right, welcome back. I'm going to trace through this. I think we're going to see. I'm going to use my pen here and see if this works. Pen. So I put the code up here. We got the list over there. There's 2 variables. Well, there's 3 variables. Nums is the list. I have in my chart over there, and num. Those are the 2 variables we're creating over here. When this list starts, I is going to be 0 because that's what we initialize it to. Is I less than nums.size? Well, the size, I guess I'll write that over here too. What is size? Size is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So size is 6. Yes, 0 is less than 6. So we then go into the loop. We get the first element. We get the element at index I, which is 5, and that goes into num. All right, is num remainder 2 equal to 0? And that all this is really asking is it even? Right? We know that that's how you check for evenness. So no, 5 is not even. So we don't do the if statement. We go and we iterate our list again, I++. So now I is 1. We are here. So we get the value at index I, which is 12. We store that in num. And we check, is that even? Yes, 12 is even. So we're going to remove the value at index I, which is 1, from nums. So I'm going to cross it off here. Now what's important to know is that when you remove an element from a list, everything shifts down, right? So all these indexes are going to change. 5 is still index 0, but this is now index 1, 2, 3, 4. And I can already see some of you are like, oh no, which is good. This is the tricky thing that makes this, we have to use a trick here. Because spoiler warning, this doesn't work correctly. All right, so next, what happens? We increment I by 1. I becomes 2, right? I'm not crossing these off. I should be crossing these off. When I is index 2, we get the value at index 2, which is right here, which is an 8. We put that in our oh, size has changed, right? Size is now 5, but 2 is less than 5, so we're good. We got 8, and we checked, is 8 even? Yes, 8 is even, so we want to remove it. We call the remove method an index 2, so we remove this from our list. Again, things shift down, so index 0 and 1 don't change, but this is now going to be index 2, and this is now index 3. And then we increment I by 1. I becomes 3. Our size is now 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 is still less than 4. So we run through this. We get the value at index I. Index 3 is right here. So this is value 9. And a 9 is not even. So we don't, the if statement is false. We don't do anything. And now we're done. And our list has the values 5, 7, 8, and 9, right? Because those are the ones I didn't cross off. However, that's an even number, and it didn't get removed. Why didn't our code remove that 8? Did you see kind of what happened? If you look, I drew arrows here, right? We checked 0, we checked 1, we checked 2, and we checked 3, but we didn't check. We never looked at this, and we never looked at this. And we got burned because this was actually an even number we were supposed to remove. The reason this happened is because as I was going up, the values later on in the list were kind of coming backwards. Every time you removed something from the list, I went forward and some value went backward, and they skipped each other. So we never actually checked. We never actually checked the value that came backwards. So when we removed this guy right here, the 7 went backwards, but our index I went forwards. So that's why we never looked at the 7, which was fine. 7 was odd, so we weren't going to remove it. But the same thing happened here. When we removed this value, the 8 came backwards and our I went forwards, so we never looked at the 8. This is a critical problem when you're trying to remove all the even values. You don't want to be skipping things because you have to check everything. So the solution to this problem is to go backwards. Instead of starting at the beginning and going to the end, you should start at the end and go to the beginning. So we want our loop, let me put my pen back on. We want our loop to start here at the end, and we want it to end here at the beginning. So we change our loop to loop backwards, and we've talked about how to do this. We initialize at nums.size minus 1, because if our size is 6, 6 minus 1 is 5, and 5 is the first index we want to start at. So that's always the case. If you're looping backwards to start the last one, it's the size minus 1. We want to go all the way backwards, so we want to loop as long as I is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, you got to remember that equal to part. That's important. We want to include 0. And then we do I minus minus. The most common thing to forget when you're looping backwards is the minus minus. You get so used to writing I plus plus in your loop. But if we're going backwards, you got to do minus minus. So you go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, this condition will never be true. You'll end up in an infinite loop. In actual, what will happen is you'll get an index of the bounds exception almost immediately, because that first iteration will break that line right there. Other than that, we changed nothing. All we changed was making the loop go backwards. And then this will work correctly. This will actually remove all the values. We're going to trace this together. You can go ahead and pause the video if you want and trace it yourself to show it to you. I'm going to trace it with you. Let me get my pen back. So same code, except for we're looping backwards. Same example. Everything's the same. We're just going backwards now. So I starts at num.size minus 1, right? So size is 6. We just counting is the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 things there. It's a 6. 6 minus 1 is 5. So num is going to be the value at index 5, which is 9. 9 is odd, so we don't remove it. I gets decremented to 4. So we look here, and 4 is, the value at 4 is 8. 8 is even, so we're going to remove it. We remove the value at index 4. So this goes away. And just like before, it changes this index 5 changes into index 4 because it slides into that spot. Then I goes minus minus to 3. My size is now 5 because I removed something. I is 3, which is right here. We get the value index 3, which is 8, which is even, right? We just looked at, this is the 8 that we skipped last time. So we remove this, which is going to change this value. This index now goes to 3 because it slides into that spot. I minus minus 3 becomes 2. Let me cross those off. We get the value index 2, which is 7. 7 is odd. We're now currently looking at this one. 7 is odd, so we don't remove it. So now we decrement our I down to 1. We're looking here. We put the value at index 1 into num, which is 12. 12 is even. Oh, this is actually 4 now because we removed one. This is even, so we're going to remove it. This is going to change the index of everything that comes after. So this index becomes 1. This index becomes 2. And then we decrement I. I is now, let's see if we can figure it out, 0. And the value at index 0 is 5. We don't remove that because it's odd. I is right here now. And then we're all done. And so our list has the values 5, 7, and 9. All the odd values, no even values. And you can see that's index 0, 1, and 2. So when you are removing values from a list, you need to loop backwards. And it will work if you loop backwards, but if you loop forwards, you will skip some elements. So that's a question you have to ask yourself. Am I removing or inserting elements into an array list? If you are doing either of those things, you must loop backwards. You can't use a for each loop to do it. Java will not let you because of this problem, because Java knows this looping forwards does not work. So it would never let you loop forwards with a for each loop loops forwards over all the elements. Well, looping forwards isn't going to work for you. So they don't let you do it. They actually protect you from that. You have to use a for loop, and you have to loop backwards to do it. There is another way to do it, looping forwards with some extra code. And if you figure that out, that's fine. You can use it. I recommend just loop backwards. It's easy to remember. That this is a rule. If you're removing or inserting elements into a list, loop backwards. And that is computer science.